Western Marxism, Part 1, 1914 and 1917, The Birth of Western and Eastern Marxism. Section, The Turning Point of August 1914 in the West. The history that I propose to reconstruct begins between August 1914 and October 1917, between the outbreak of the First World War and the victory of the October Revolution. On the wave of these two epochal events, Marxism experienced a global diffusion that projected it well beyond the Western borders where it had been confined since the Second International. There is, however, another side to the triumphal coin. The encounter through culture, geopolitics, and economic social conditions among very different peoples stimulated an internal process of differentiation, with the emergence of contradictions and conflicts unknown previously. To understand these, we must interrogate the deep-seated motivations that led to one adhering to the communist and Marxist movements that took form in those years. In the West, the radical, indeed apocalyptic historical turning point is undoubtedly represented by the scale and the flames of the First World War. The exhaustion, disgust, and indignation over the interminable slaughter promoted the rapid spread of the communist movement. What had already happened in Italy in the months or even weeks that preceded the rise of the Bolsheviks to power is symptomatic. Between February and October 1917, two delegates of the provisional government constituted in Moscow after the overthrow of the Tsarist autocracy arrived in Turin to contact an allied country in the ongoing war and to counter rising pacifist tendencies. Before they had even arrived, the delegates made clear their hostility to the Bolsheviks, who demanded immediate peace. But when Kerensky's emissaries appeared on the balcony of the Sicardi Palace, the crowd of 40,000 workers that had been waiting for them started shouting, "Viva Lenin!" It was, to be exact, August the 13th, 1917. 10 days later, barricades went up to support the anti-war opposition, resulting in Turin being declared a war zone and the creation of military tribunals. We could say that the mass of protesters and rebels joined the October Revolution before it had even occurred, and joined it on the wave of anti-war struggle. In our day, it is politically correct to speak of October 1917 in Russia not as a revolution, but rather as a coup d'etat, except that we see the protagonist of this supposed coup provoke an almost revolution thousands of kilometers away before it had even taken power. This happened because his name and the party he guided were inextricably connected to an unequivocal condemnation of the war and the socio-political system accused of provoking it. This spiritual climate explains the formidable attraction that the October Revolution exercised in the West, not only on the masses, but also on intellectuals of the highest level. One thinks of Georg Lukács. In his autobiography, he recalls, quote, "My interest in ethics led me to the revolution." This interest was one with his opposition to the war. He saw this opposition as constituted by the most elementary forms of morality. Beginning of long quote. I was sharply opposed to it from the outset. My hostility to positivism was partly politically motivated. For all my condemnation of conditions in Hungary, this did not mean I was prepared to accept British parliamentarism as an alternative ideal. But at the time, I perceived nothing with which to replace the existing order. From that point of view, the Revolution of 1917 was a great experience, since it made clear that things could be otherwise. Whatever view one took of this otherwise, it made a decisive difference to all our lives, or at least to the lives of a considerable portion of our generation. End of long quote. Analogously, Ernst Bloch writes, speaking of the young Hungarian philosopher and himself, quote, "At the start of the war in 1914, we felt completely lost. This war became a decisive factor in the development of each of us. For him, the link with the communist movement was both a support and a refuge." End quote. Even without forming organic relationships with the party and the communist movement, on the plane of ideas, the young German philosopher reached conclusions not dissimilar to those of the young Hungarian philosopher. Later, Bloch would write that he took in the Russian Revolution as an unprecedented liberating jubilee. In The Spirit of Utopia, composed mainly during the war years, a period among the most infamous in Europe, he wrote that, if Europe, responsible for the war, prompts eternal death, the fact that the country of the October Revolution resisted the aggression of this or that capitalist power was to be celebrated. Yes, quote, there stands unbowed a Marxist republic in Russia. End quote. In any case, more than ever he called for the true total revolution invoked by Marx that will realize freedom and signal the beginning of world history after prehistory. The October Revolution was the truth finally discovered of how many had worked to make concrete the struggle against the war, even against the genocide, Völkermord, that was occurring. We turn this time to the language of two leaders of the socialist and anti-militarist movement, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. The future leaders of the October Revolution, some of whom had been educated in the West, also read and experienced the First World War as the definitive demonstration of the intrinsic horror of the capitalist imperialist system and the absolute necessity of overthrowing it. To give a few examples, Bukharin spoke of the horrid factory of corpses, and Stalin of mass extermination of the life forces of the people. The picture painted by Trotsky was particularly eloquent. Quote, the work of Kane of the patriotic press of the two opposed sides was the irrefutable demonstration of the moral decadence of bourgeois society. Yes, humanity had fallen back into a blind and shameful barbarism, trying to set fire to a contest of bloody folly by using the most advanced technologies to militaristic ends. It was a scientific barbarism, which raised up the greatest discoveries of humanity, only to destroy the foundations of civilized social life and annihilate the human race. End quote. All the good that civilization had produced had been drowned in blood and the filth of the trenches. Quote, health, comfort, hygiene, the usual everyday relationships, the bonds of friendship, professional obligations, and, in the last analysis, the apparently indestructible rules of morality. End quote. Later, but still regarding the catastrophe that broke out in 1914, the term Holocaust emerged. On August 31st, 1939, Molotov accused France and England of having rejected the Soviet policy of collective security in the hopes of unleashing the Third Reich against the USSR, without hesitating thereby to provoke a new great massacre, a new Holocaust of the nations. End section.